Hi, I'm David Goforth with Cooperative Extension Successful Gardener. The first step in environmental literacy is actually knowing the plants, knowing their names. For example, if I was to say, you often find hackberries, red cedar, elm, and honey locust where there's been an old pasture. That wouldn't make any sense if you didn't know the plants. So let me introduce you to a few plants. This tree right here is a hackberry, and one of the most interesting things I find about the hackberry is actually its distribution within Cabarrus County. If you'll get within what we call the ring dike area, basically the area between my office and Philip Morris and the Speedway out there, that area, this is a very common tree. In fact, some of the woodlots, this is about half the trees that are there are of this species, the Celtis occidentalis or hackberry. But if you get outside of that area, into this part of Cabarrus County, you will find there's closer to 1 or 2 per acre at the most. And then if you go farther east on into Stanley County and Montgomery County, you'll find huge tracts where there's none of these trees at all. It becomes a very rare tree over there. This is actually on my property here. It's a nice tree that we have, and one of the ways to identify this is by its corky bark. If you look at a very young tree, it is very smooth, and then it'll start having warts on it, and then the warts get larger and larger and larger, and as it gets older, you get this real warty appearance right down here. But the younger warts seem to be a little bit more interesting to me. The thing about this tree is I don't know a lot of uses for it. It's fairly uncommon. I do burn it as firewood, but beyond firewood, that's about the only use. I'm sure they would cut one this size and put it on logs for pallets or something like that, but it's not a real useful wood that I'm aware of. This is the way the leaves look on the hackberry tree, and one of the characteristics is they tend to be uneven. You can see how this one's a lot wider on this side than it is the other side, and one of the trees that's very consistently dependable does that, gives you this leaf shape on the leaves. Other than that, it's sort of a hard tree to identify. There is a similar species that you'll find occasionally. I've never seen it in Cabarrus County, but I have seen it in Rowan County and again in Montgomery County, which is called the sugarberry. It's the Celtis laevigata compared to the Celtis occidentalis, and that one will have seeds that you can actually bite into, and the inside of the seed will taste sort of sweet. But you need to know what you're doing, because I think the seeds on this one would bust your teeth. This right here is a eastern red cedar. It's the only native juniper we have in this particular area of the Piedmont. And again, it's one you'll find a lot of times in old pastures. One of the reasons for that is because it will tolerate very close grazing. They'll graze over it a number of times and bite it down and make almost a natural bonsai out of it. And then when the pasture is abandoned, this thing can take off and can grow up. This is a fairly rot-resistant and insect-resistant wood, the heartwood of this is, and you can actually use it in ground contact for a number of years. A lot of the old barns that were built with local material, the pole barns, they would use the cedar for the poles. Then they would use the oak for the side boards because oak was water resistant. And then they would use maple up under the rafters because nails wouldn't pull out of maple near as well as it would oak or something else. So this is also used for fence posts. It has a lot of uses as a natural rot resistant or decay resistant wood. This is also used in furniture for things like cedar chest. And I've known people to take paneling from this and line their closets with it, also to make a very beautiful cedar closet. So it's a very useful wood that's locally here. We don't have real good markets for it anymore, but it's one worth keeping sometimes in your landscape. Another common use for the eastern red cedar is as a Christmas tree. It's nothing like the Fraser fir, of course, but it's nostalgic. It's what we used when I was growing up, and when I cut a Christmas tree, it's also the one that I use. You can see here from this young tree how it might suit that purpose. You can also see a little bit better about how to identify it. This is basically the only tree, native tree in our landscape that looks like this. When I first saw this tree right here, I had to go look and see how big the largest state tree was. Of course, the state record is about twice the size of this one, but this one is by far the hugest of the honey locusts that I've ever seen. This one will also develop in old pastures because the cows will not do not graze it down. It's got some very huge thorns when it's young, which is one of the easy ways to identify it when you see a young tree. Some of the most spectacular thorns, not the only thorny tree we have in Cabarrus County, but some of the most spectacular thorns you'll ever see is on this particular tree right here. Honey locust is a little bit rot resistant, but it's typically not used for very much. In fact, I discriminate against it very heavily and have cut most of it down on my property to the point I can't really pull a leaf down here to show you what a leaf looks like, but it is a compound leaf. By compound, I mean that the part associated with one bud has got several parts to it. And each of the little leaflets are called, each of the little parts are called leaflets. So very many leaflets in a honey locust leaf. This tree tends to grow in more open areas. This obviously come up when this was more open pasture area, and so there's not any little ones coming up around it right now. But when I first saw this tree, I thought I really need to see how large the state record is. Of course, the state record is maybe twice as big as this tree, but this one here is the largest one that I've ever seen myself. So another tree that you might find around here in Cabarrus County. Another member of this community down here in this fairly wet area is the black walnut. Black walnut makes a very poor yard tree because, number one, the fruit, the nuts will drop, which are very heavy and very messy and could actually damage cars and people if they hit them. The other thing is the leaves will typically fall fairly early in the year. During most years, by the end of July even, you'll see these walnut trees starting to defoliate. So not a real good tree for our lawn, but one that does grow good down in wet areas of Cabarrus County and fairly useful both for wildlife and, for that matter, for humans. You can eat the nuts as an edible tree. And also the wood makes a very beautiful furniture and is used for that purpose. The market's real variable on that, not a real good market for it, and so I've seen people try to plant large acreages of walnuts. I'm not really sure that's a good idea in our climate here, but if you've got a nice sized tree, you might want to try to take care and cut it for yourself for your own use or for a friend or another woodworker to use. The economics are sort of hard to cut it and store it for 2 or 3 or 4 years until somebody wants to purchase it from you. So again, the economics are a little bit hard locally to sell it, but it does make very beautiful dark walnut furniture. On identifying the walnut tree, we've got a compound leaf here, and this compound leaf, we call it pinnately arranged because it's arranged along this center stem right here, compared to some of the other plants like this one, which has got a palmate arrangement. This particular little weed right here is Virginia creeper, and the leaves are arranged around a central point, and so that's called palmate, like somebody's palm. This is called pinnately arranged because it's, again, along the single stem there. Now we've got several trees that will look similar to this. In fact, the pecan looks very similar to this. You've got to be very observant to tell the difference by looking at them, but it's fairly easy if you'll take the smell and crumble up the black walnut. It's got a very distinctive black walnut smell. In fact, the husk are sometimes used, has got that same smell, and sometimes used as a dye. It will dye things like clothing or hair, what have you, into a real deep brownish, olive brownish color. So that's another use for this particular tree in our landscape here. Let's look at one more citizen of this area here, and I will compare something else about the leaves from the black walnut and the next tree, which is the white ash. One of the things I want to do is compare the leaf arrangement on this black walnut with the leaf arrangement on the ash tree. The leaf arrangement on a walnut tree is alternate. That means that there's one leaf on this side and there's one leaf on that side. So we've got a compound leaf. We don't look at the leaflet arrangement. We look at the leaf itself, where the buds are at, and you'll see one leaf by itself, one leaf by itself, and one leaf by itself. That's called alternate. Now, if we take a ash tree here, it's a different arrangement. You'll see as we come up this ash tree here, this limb is opposite this limb, and we come over to this leaf is opposite this leaf, and this leaf is opposite this leaf. And so on an ash tree, we call it a opposite leaf arrangement. We've still got a compound leaf, but it's a compound, opposite compound leaf arrangement. This is our ash tree right here, and ash trees are very good wood, very straight wood. In fact, ashes is one of the woods they'll use to make baseball bats. Some of your best baseball bats come out of ash wood, the wooden baseball bats, and that's this particular tree right here, and useful for a number of other purposes also. As we look across this wooded area right here that used to be pasture, we don't see any young honey locusts. We don't see any young cedars. We don't see any young hackberries coming up, or maybe a few young hackberries, but not many young hackberries coming up. And the reason is something called shade tolerance. The main plant that we see here is this southern sugar maple. Here you can see the opposite leaf arrangement on it, and the maple leaf that's about as wide as it is long. The lobe pattern here, very much easy tree to identify, is the southern sugar maple, and it's the major tree coming up because it is shade tolerant. And so in another 50 years, the community down here in this creek bottom will totally change. We won't have that many ash and honey locusts, may not have a honey locust at all, but we'll have a lot of these southern sugar maples. If you have any questions about any of our native trees, don't hesitate to give me a call at the office. And until next time, plan and plant for a better world.